Dr. Jahren will be offering some remarks, after which she'll be taking questions from the audience, so you can go ahead and be getting those ready. And after that, she will be available in the lobby to sign books, and these can be books that you brought with you or books purchased from the App State campus store in the lobby. The Common Reading Program at Appalachian State each year for now more than a quarter century has chosen and provided to all first year and transfer students a book, the Common Reading book, with the intention that this will promote and guide intellectual, interdisciplinary discussions on the topic of the book among students and with faculty and other members of our community, both inside and outside the classroom. And the Common Reading book for this year is Jaren's, The Story of More, How We Got to Climate Change and Where to Go From Here. Tonight's event is offered jointly by the Common Reading Program and App State's new, as of this fall, Quality Enhancement Plan, or QEP, entitled Pathways to Resilience, which has a focus on climate literacy and climate responsibility. To introduce Dr. Jahren, I'd like to welcome Laura England, practitioner in residence in the Department of Sustainable Development and Associate Director of the QEP.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here. Thank you to Dr. Klima for inviting Pathways to Resilience to partner with the Common Reading Program on this very special event. Pathways to Resilience is a 5-year campus-wide initiative aimed at growing our students' climate literacy and capacity to participate in positive climate actions in their future professions and communities. As Dr. Klima noted, this semester marks the official start of Pathways to Resilience. So we were thrilled with the good timing when the Common Reading Program selected for this academic year's Common Read a climate book. Also, in terms of good timing, it's appropriate that our community is gathered tonight to learn from a climate author, because this week is Climate Week. Climate Week takes place each September in conjunction with the United Nations General Assembly in New York City, and brings together heads of government with inspiring climate leaders and innovators from across all sectors of the economy and society. So tonight's event feels a little bit like our community's participation in the Climate Week's efforts to foreground climate leaders, climate thinkers, and climate doers. And on that note, we are incredibly excited to welcome Dr. Hope Jahren to App State. Yes, let's do. Her book, The Story of More, How We Got to Climate Change and Where We Go From Here, tells the story of what many scientists call the Great Acceleration, which is the post-1950 acceleration of human impacts on our planet and its systems, notably the climate system. Thousands of academic articles have been written about the Great Acceleration, but with readership limited largely to scientists and other scholars. Dr. Jaren's compelling book has reached a wide and growing public audience and is becoming an essential read in the environmental canon. It's been received so enthusiastically because she shares her scientific expertise and the data in narrative form, and because she puts herself in the story. With her engaging voice and vignettes from her own life and from the lives of family, friends, and colleagues, Dr. Jahren makes the global personal and the personal global. Her book embodies the point that story and storytelling are an essential piece of growing a broader, more meaningful, and more productive climate conversation. One review of The Story of More declares, if there's one book that all of us should read about the state of the environment, it's this one. to more formally introduce her. Dr. Hope Jahren is an award-winning scientist, a passionate teacher, and a brilliant writer. Her 2018 memoir, Lab Girl, became a national bestseller and a National Book Critics Circle Award winner. She has been pursuing independent research in paleobiology since 1996, when she completed her PhD at the University of California, Berkeley, and began teaching and researching first at the Georgia Institute of Technology and then at Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Jahren is the recipient of 3 Fulbright Awards and is one of just 4 scientists to have been awarded both of the Young Investigator Medals given within the Earth Sciences. She was a tenured professor at the University of Hawaii in Honolulu from 2008 to 2016, where she built the isotope geobiology laboratories with support from the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, and the National Institutes of Health. She currently holds the J. Tuzo Wilson Professorship at the University of Oslo in Norway. The prestigious academic journal Nature has called her the voice that science has been waiting for. Please join me once again in welcoming Dr. Hope Jahren to App State.
Hey, thanks. Thanks so much. Okay. So we're getting started a little late, so I'm Hope Jahren, the voice that you've been waiting for. I want to say hello. I want to say how happy I am to be here, and I want to say how grateful I am that you are here. There's so many things you could be doing tonight. There's really good barbecue in Boone. I tried it. There's good Mexican food in Boone. I tried it. So there's a lot of places you could be tonight, a lot of things that you could be doing, but you chose to come here, and I'm very grateful that you did. I'm also a little nervous about speaking to you. I don't get super nervous most of the time, but you're always afraid that you'll say something wrong or that you'll hear. I'm kind of afraid that maybe I'll missay something wrong here at Appalachian State University. Okay. How many faculty do we have? How many students do we have? Okay, every time they laugh at one of my jokes, they get a point. Okay? Right? Yeah, points for everyone. Okay. So here we go. So I flew into Raleigh and I drove here, and it was really beautiful. And I got to see the trees, and I study trees. I study photosynthetic organisms, and it's great to see them, the broad-leafed species change and everything. But the trip into Raleigh was terrible. It was horrible turbulence landing. It was the kind where you're jumping around in your seatbelt and stuff. And I just thought, this is awful, but it could be worse. I could be going to Georgia Southern University. Did I get it? Okay, I'll stop trying to be funny now. And since you're all here, I need you to turn off your cell phones, with one very important exception, because the Marlins are playing the Twins tonight at Target Field in Minneapolis. And I know this is football country, but I need one person to follow the game on their phone. And I want you to yell out when the Twins score. And I'm dead serious. Will you do it? Yes? What's your name? Sorry? Martha's going to take care of that for us. And I'm dead serious. You're what? Okay. I will have backup. So you. I don't really know how to feel now. She's a Brewers fan. Okay. Okay. I don't have money riding on this game, but I've got a lot of heart in it, so I need to know these things. But let's get started with the talk. So I'm not going to assume that you have read the book. I'm not going to assume that you have opened the book. I'm going to assume that I have the chance to talk to you for 40 minutes. And so I get to tell you what I think are the 15 things that everybody should know about global change. And I'm going to take that opportunity. This is me in my natural habitat. I started out as a scientist studying photosynthesis, studying the way that plants and green organisms make a living, sort of the ground rules for what do they need in order to be viable, what do they need in order to be successful, how does the balance of who's successful change. I can really recommend it as a great career, especially if you're a biologist. Study plants and not animals, seriously, because there is so much paperwork associated with experimenting on animals. Like if you want to put a rat in a cage and make it thirsty for like 8 hours, you would not believe the amount of approval and stuff like that. If you get tired of your plants halfway through an experiment, you can just forget to water them and throw them in the dumpster and nobody cares, right? So seriously, if you're going to be a biologist, think about studying plants and not animals. It will save you years and years of headache. So everything we should know about global change, and you may notice that I don't call it climate change. Climate change is something we talk about a lot. I call it global change because the story of this is really a lot more complicated than climate. And the story of change is more complicated than change. As Heraclitus told us more than 2,000 years ago, the only constant is change. So over time, we expect things to change, right? Things change and it makes other things change, et cetera, and other things stay the same. So a lot of the change that we see during our lifetimes is not something that we would guess wouldn't happen. The world changes as we change. What I'm going to try to argue tonight is mostly the most important thing that has changed is not the world or the climate, et cetera, it's us. So I'm going to tell you this as a story of 50 years, a story that I told as this book in 2020, soon after I turned 50. So I sat down and I said to myself, what's the best way to assess the last years of global change? I said, well, how have things changed over my lifetime? How has the world changed? Do I see that reflected in my own life? Maybe other people see these changes reflected in their lives. I just looked at the data of what the world tells us about food and disease and electricity and inventions and cars and all these other things. And it came together as kind of an interesting picture, I think. We're going to talk a lot about technology because technology is one of the big drivers of change. So some of our technologies haven't changed. For example, baseball, we use the same tools to do the same things for at least the last 50 years, and lo and behold, we get about the same result. So 1969, the #1 RBI for the Twins was Harmon Killebrew, and in 2019, 50 years later, the #1 RBI for the Twins was Eddie Rosario. And they both had the same batting average. So using the same technology to do the same thing yielded approximately the same result. When technology changes, we often see the ripple effects changing in terms of both inanimate things like energy and also animate things like the way we live. So here's a technology that has changed. So back in 1969, when I was born, believe it or not, those were the phones we used. They were wired to the wall. They transmitted signals through electricity, etc. And what we all use now is a cellular phone, which transmits its signals through cell towers and also through satellites. So the technology has changed quite a bit, and what we use these things for has also changed. Okay, so at the top, that's Richard Nixon using the telephone in 1969 to talk to the astronauts who had just completed the moon landing and to congratulate them. Okay, 50 odd years later, here's the former president using his cell phone probably to do something on social media. And there's our current president using his cell phone to take a photograph of his best friends that he will never ever see again. So you can see that as the technology changed, what we use these things for changed, and the shape of our culture changed. The other thing I'm going to say is that this is as political as I am going to get tonight. I promise. These two bozos and their phones, okay? That's it. So let's look at the data. These are going to be very simple charts. This is number one, these 15 important things to know about global change. This is number one. Feel free to take a photograph with your cell phone if you want to get all 15. Collect them all, right? So here's one thing that happened. So 1970 up to now, that's 50 years, right? The population of people on the globe, the number of people that we share the globe with, has doubled. It was about pushing 4 billion when I was born, and it's well at 8 billion now. So this is something that we looked around and saw in the 1970s. Politicians, scholars, intellectuals could see that the population was growing. And there was a great deal of angst over this, in that there was a big question as to how the Earth was going to feed everyone. So with a complete doubling in population, the idea was, where are we going to find enough food to keep that many people going? Of course, at the levels of 1970, there was a certain part of the globe that was hungry at the time. And when we thought about population going up, we anticipated widespread famine and all of the suffering that would accrue from that. Fortunately, our tools changed, our technology changed, and through the concerted effort of places, mostly the state universities, Iowa State University, Illinois State University were critical for this. North Carolina played a part in a different angle of this, but we had what was called the Green Revolution. And miraculously, quite miraculously, over that same period of time, the amount of grain we produced on a global basis tripled. So as population doubled, the amount of grain we produced tripled. But the amount of land that we planted with grain did not change over that period, which makes this all the more amazing. So only about 30% of the land area is planted with any kind of crop, and that changed within a few percent. Basically, we did not make that innovation that produced that explosion of more food by just planting more farmland. We did it by increasing crop yield drastically. So crop yield, and this is across everything, has more than doubled. There are plenty of crops you can look at where this has gone up maybe 4 times. But there are very few crops that you can look at that over the last 50 years, the yield has at least gone up by 50%, if not doubled or tripled. This means that the amount of food that you can get out of the footprint of land has doubled, right? How did that happen? 3 ways. First, we feed these crops better than we did. We take care of them better than we did. and they themselves are different organisms than they were in the 1950s. So we've learned more about how to fertilize, how to water strategically. We've developed pesticides and herbicides that protect these things while they're growing. And very importantly, we've gone on to new forms of molecular breeding that have allowed us to make varieties that preferentially put tissue into the edible portion of the plant, right? So, and that was a literal constellation of technological miracles that were pursued in the agricultural portions of US state universities, really. What do we do with all this grain nowadays? So, population doubled, grain production tripled. What happens to all this grain? Well, you might be surprised to learn that it's a minority of it that actually gets eaten by people. So about 40% you find in your cereal and in your bread and in your rice and things like that. About 40% of it, the same amount of it, is fed to animals. And most of that turns into feces, right? So you basically need 10 pounds of grain in order to make 1 pound of meat. That's that concentration factor associated with meat. The other 20%, which is interesting, which I won't touch on directly here unless we want to talk about it later, is that we take that huge portion of food, we ferment it into flammable fuel and use it for combustion to run engines, which is a really interesting approach, right? We run engines in order to till the soil and plant the seed, harvest, etc. And then we take that food that we just grew, we ferment it, we put it back into an engine so that we can drive it in order to produce more, right? It's an example of the interesting place we're at right now in terms of energy technologies. So let's look at that animal feed, 40%. Global meat production has tripled across those last 50 years. So population doubled, grain production tripled. Population doubled, grain production tripled, and meat production also tripled. How? Many of the same mechanisms. So you can see from this that the amount of beef, this is just in the United States, the amount of beef that we produce, 1970 to now, has increased by 30%. So we're cranking out 30% more beef. But we're doing that by slaughtering 15% fewer animals, right? So less steer is giving us more meat. How can that be true? It's the same three mechanisms. So we are feeding these animals better, we are protecting them better, and we are using different bred versions of themselves. So for example, a steer now can grow to 200 pounds in about 50 days. That was something that took more than a year, sort of back in the 1950s. Pigs are a really interesting example in that 50 years ago, the average litter of piglets was 6, and now it's about 10. Compounded by the fact that pigs now give birth twice a year as opposed to once a year. We also have ways of producing meat that maximize the amount of food that goes into gaining weight and minimizing the amount of food that goes into burning, doing stuff like walking, turning your head, getting your heart rate up, etc. And that's the reason for the intense confinement that we find animals subjected to in modern meat production. So here's the money shot, as you might say, in modeling. The twins aren't doing anything, am I right? Nothing? Are they behind? They're starting right now. Okay. Okay. This is the money shot in terms of really what's at the base root of why things changed during my lifetime and how your generation will face the planet very differently than mine did. So here we are. This is a little bit complicated, but I'll walk you through it. Again, the x-axis, as in all my graphs, is the same. It's that 50 years between 1969 and 2020. And up this axis, we have calories, 1,000, 2,000, all the way up to 4,000. Now that's the food supply per person. This is different than the amount of calories people take in. This is the amount of calories per person that is the entire supply for the globe or the country or whatever. So the amount of food that is theoretically available were it to be divided up. So this yellow box is the minimum amount of calories required for survival. So for example, if you're just laying in a hospital bed, staying alive, not doing anything, not working or moving, etc., you still need somewhere around 1,500 calories on average just to sustain life. To sustain life at a minimal level, you need sort of around 2,000 calories a day. The world food supply, the country food supply for Ethiopia during 84 to 85, which is a terrible, terrible famine. You'll often sometimes still see pictures of the suffering that took place then. If you're familiar with the Do They Know It's Christmas After All, right? That song was written in order to provide aid for this terrible famine that was taking place. So if you took the Ethiopian food supply, divvied it up between every person, what you had for those years was that dotted line, so really below that. So the world average is those black dots. And what you see is that between 1960 and 2020, we have moved from a world where our main activity, global activity, was to put together the calories on average that would keep us alive. So we were living close to that place where our fundamental concern as communities, as nations, etc., was feeding ourselves, taking care of our basic needs. Through the Green Revolution and through all these new technologies, we have effectively achieved a world where we are very far from that. The global food supply is more than twice what we need to stay alive. Now, that's allowed us to commit to many other activities, right? So, and you see this in the population, right? Is anybody here born and raised on a farm? Keep your hand up. Does anybody here have parents that were born and raised on a farm? Okay, keep your hand up. Anybody here with grandparents who was born and raised on a farm? Okay, so that tells a story in itself, right? It used to take an awful large part of the population to be doing this work on the farms in order to take care of society's basic needs. At this point, with the technological innovations of various kinds, we've got a world where we're able to produce twice as much for those basic needs using very few people. So 200 years ago, only 3% of the global population lived in cities, doing city things. Everybody else was concentrating on meeting that need of producing food. Now we've got almost the opposite scenario where in some places in Europe, here in the US it's about 10% still, but the vast majority of people are living in cities, doing activities, performing work that's not associated with the primary production of food, of calories for the food supply. It turns out that the activities we've thrown ourselves into have been ones that require a great deal of energy consumption. So we've specialized into manufacturing, we've specialized into communication, we've specialized into transportation. And so we're moving the agricultural products and the manufacturing products that we make across much, much more distance, and we're using those things in order to perform activities that burn even more energy. And so a consequence of this, as we've moved away from taking care of our fundamental needs into a world where we can do other things, is that the energy that we consume in order to do that has tripled as well, right? So if we look at, again, population doubled, food production tripled, and energy consumption tripled. Wait, say one last thing about this. I love this graph. The USA food supply, that's not how much we eat. That's the food supply that sits here in the USA. If you divvied it up equally between people, you'd get somewhere about twice as high as the world average. And what we see when we analyze this is that countries that are very, very high at the top, like the USA, are also the very highest energy users in the globe. So there seems to be something fundamental that goes along with, we meet these basic needs, we move into these higher endeavors, and they have, on the trajectory we've been going, been very energy-intensive endeavors. Right? And the thing we want to start asking ourselves, this is the punchline coming to you early, is after meeting those needs and moving to these endeavors, the big question is, can those endeavors be less energy intensive? Energy consumption. Can we achieve these goals? Now that we're free of these goals, can we achieve these goals in a direction that is less energy intensive? Okay, so energy consumption has almost tripled. CO2 emissions have more than doubled. That's because most of those energy needs we fulfill using fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are made of carbon. They are the energy from the sun and carbon from the atmosphere that plants of various sizes have trapped and buried in the earth, come back up as coal and oil, burned in engines and factories and generators, and that energy from the sun comes back to us, we can do things with it, and the carbon goes back out into the atmosphere. So we've produced, using all that energy, as you would expect, we've produced CO2, which has more than doubled. The amount that has remained in the atmosphere has increased by about 30%. So the amount we kick out has doubled. The amount that stays in the atmosphere has increased by about 30%. And that's because a great deal of what we kick out goes into the ocean. And a relatively small amount of it stays behind in the atmosphere. Now, nothing of what I'm telling you here is controversial. The instruments that measure CO2 in the atmosphere, the spectrometers, they were invented maybe 100 years ago. They work very, very well, very small errors. We can just see this. CO2 in the atmosphere has gone up by 30%. The other thing that we see, again, using a technology from the 1700s called the thermometer, we can see that global average temperature has gone up since the 70s in that sort of jagged pattern by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit, which admittedly doesn't sound like much. We believe that those two are linked because when we take CO2 and shine light through it, we can see energy being transform to heat within that model. So there are very basic things about physical chemistry that tell us that the CO2 leads to this warming. Again, these aren't controversial things. So the global average temperature has gone up, and that makes sense if we then look at global sea level has gone up. We've just put a lot more energy into the atmosphere. And that cycles into the ocean, cycles into our weather patterns, et cetera. And you see sea level has risen by about 5 inches. That's as a global average. Actually, here on the East Coast, on the sea coast here, you've got sea level increasing much faster than most places around the world. Some of this is from the ocean expanding because it's hot, and some of it is from ice melting and adding to the volume of the ocean. So one thing that's been talked about is, can we come up with energy from sources that do not emit CO2, right? Green energy. And you'll often say that green energy is the fastest growing kind of energy. You can see that there really wasn't very much investment in wind and solar back in the 70s. And now it's a thriving business. You see folks have solar panels on their houses. You see, if you drive around the country, you'll see an awful lot of those windmills. You can see that, especially just since the year 2000, the amount of solar power has increased by about 25%. Let's not get mixed up by this, and this is really an important thing to point out to students particularly. If we look at where we're getting energy in order to make electricity, and this is just electricity, so by and far for transport, for planes and boats and cars, those overwhelmingly come from fossil fuels, right? But if we look at the generation of electricity, we're still, the world over, mostly using fossil fuels for that. They kick out the CO2 that continues the effects that I just showed you. A good portion of the green pie is hydropower, so dams, waterfalls, water generation. Hydropower is the most extensive green energy solution on the planet. Even though we don't hear much about it, the countries of Brazil and China are world leaders in new hydropower, right? So there are countries that are developing and industrializing and are taking a very different path than the one that the US took. So there are green directions for development, and the future is really not going to be the same as the past. Another change, right? Still a great deal of energy we get from nuclear power, which does not create CO2. Those approaches are decreasing because when things go wrong with nuclear energy, they go very, very wrong. But this is another source of green energy, provided the engineering can be made safe and foolproof. Wind and solar, which I just showed you, is going up by 25%, right, in the last 50 years, still comprises a tiny part of the pie, about 7%. So we could double, we could triple, we could by a factor of 10 change the number of windmills, the number of solar panels we're dealing with, and we're still not going to make a big gouge in the pie. So if we decide that we want something different for the next 50 years, or we want to disrupt some of these causes and effects that we've seen associated with CO2 production and the 2-degree temperature rise and the 5-inch sea level rise, et cetera. If we want to disrupt some of that, we're going to need a different story for the next 50 years. In fact, we're going to need an energy revolution in the same kind of vein that we had a revolution with food 50 years ago. And it's not going to come from one magic place, just as the revolution associated with food growth didn't come from just one fertilizer or just one irrigation technology, et cetera. And this is sort of the root of where we are and where we're going to need to go if we choose for that. Another thing to notice is that reduced energy use, which I talk about in my book, different ways we can approach questioning the amount of energy we use in our daily activities. We do have large portions of the earth that need to use more energy. And it sounds strange to hear me say that, but we still have large portions of the earth where people need refrigeration for medication. They need electricity so they can sterilize hospital tools and light the way at night and after school so kids can study and things like that. So we are a society and a globe that's going to have to use energy. We just need something to come together that will help us to get over this hump going into the future and avoid really something terrible, which we did achieve with the agricultural revolution. We just haven't come up with the right imagination solution yet. And that's why I love to talk to folks about what they're doing and how your major can maybe fit into some of this, because there are legal ramifications for making choices, there are social ramifications, there are urban planning ramifications, and also in the sciences as well, where this answer is going to come from. So I'm going to leave you with that there today and take some questions. If you're interested in any of the places where I got any of this data, any of the sourcing, go ahead and ask me. And if I can't tell you right now, I will get that information to you. So thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to listen to questions. Nothing?
We do have some time.
No score?
We do have some time right now for Dr. Jahren to take questions from the audience, if you have any. It's hard to see from up here. Are there microphones set up on the floor anywhere?
Marlins hit a homer. It's 0-1 for the
Woo!
If you want to stick around for just a few minutes.
Yep, that sounds about right.
We've got, looks like a microphone being set up in this aisle, and Shay Tuberty is over there. Shay, wave your hand, is director of App State's QEP and also a professor of biology. And maybe a microphone's going to appear in this aisle as well, where Laura England has appeared down on the floor. And we can take a few minutes for questions, maybe just a few minutes, though, out of respect, remembering that Dr. Jahren is here visiting from a country where it's Wednesday already. And I guess, yeah, given how dim it is, maybe rather than having them bring the microphone to you, if you could go to the microphone, please, and ask your question.
Rick, we've got a question over here.
Yeah, go right ahead.
My name is Anderson LaRocca. I am an environmental science major, maybe looking to switch to environmental justice or sociology. My question is, do you think global change feels more sociological now that younger people are talking about it? And are there any promising scientific endeavors that would aid more than general sociological discussion?
Yeah, I think the sociological discussion, I think the energy that young people are bringing to this is going to be absolutely crucial for how it gets solved. And also the amount of collateral damage that's perpetuated as it gets solved. I think about, the two lithium producing countries in the world are Peru and Chile. Produce the most, and there's very few other countries with lots of lithium there. Now, what we would expect to see, as all of our products have incorporated lithium in order to make these batteries, and soon it will be spreading into cars as well, you'd expect the GDP, you'd expect the earning power, you'd expect some of the richness to go into those countries, and you'd expect to see the standard of living increase. Well, it hasn't, like since the year 2000. And so clearly that's a social justice issue. There's something associated with trade laws and the history of colonization that is impeding that particular type of progress, right? And so I think we're in an age where those questions are going to get asked in a way that they didn't, back in the 1950s. That's a specific example I can think of. Does that come close to, yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Hello.
Hi.
So as a car enthusiast, I often like to look into kind of news about cars and also alternative fuel. And there was a story I read a while back about Toyota and Yamaha actually creating like a kind of like internal combustion engine that actually runs on hydrogen, and that's what it dispenses instead of like carbon emissions. So I was wondering what your opinion is on like hydrogen fuel. I know Toyota actually has I think it's called the Mirai, which is a car that runs on hydrogen. So I was wondering what your opinion is on like hydrogen as an alternative fuel.
Yeah, you're hitting me exactly in my blind spot. I don't know that much about hydrogen fuel. I really don't know. I don't think I could say anything super worth hearing about that. What I can say that some folks haven't heard is that in the 1970s, there was a major revolution in combustion engine efficiency. All of a sudden, it was there was a oil crisis of the 1970s, and car manufacturers were somehow able to make cars more efficient by, the miles per gallon almost doubled. Now, we compensated for that by making much, much bigger cars and driving them further. But I still believe there's a lot of hope for the fossil fuel combustion engine in terms of engineering. I don't think it should be abandoned. I think with proper engineering, it has its place and it can be made much, much more efficient. We just have to return to embracing those technologies.
Yeah, I also agree with that. Thank you very much.
Does that touch on what it wasn't hydrogen, but.
That's all good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hope, I just wanted to say in opening, I thought the early part of your book and when you went through the population and some of the early statistics was exceedingly good. I think you conveyed it in a very realistic and balanced way. And having read that, I was hoping that the book was going to close back around at the end and that you would come back to the population issue. And it does not. It somehow leads away. And do you have anything to say about, it's a tough question.
Yeah.
It's a nice one to dodge a little bit, but do you have anything you would say then about global population?
Yeah, so population is an interesting thing. The rhetoric around population is one of these things people talk about when they really want to be talking about something else. For a lot of folks, overpopulation is this really terrible thing that's driving, climate change. We've just got way too many people on the earth. It's teeming with people. We've got way too many people. This is the whole problem. When you press people like that about what is the solution for that particular problem, you get into some kind of dark territory in terms of what is the practical solution for a potential overpopulation scenario. The thing I remind people is that birth rates in every country in the world are coming down. They're coming down the fastest in India. And so in the third world, birth rates are coming down actually much faster than they are in what we call the first world. So people have a lot of interesting issues that are wrapped up in overpopulation. Another good one is that another example, political example, is that you're now starting to see that declining birth rate held forward as this bad thing, right? And so I often think the rhetoric of overpopulation and birth rate is actually used to discuss sort of something else is more about tribal politics than population in general. That's my personal feeling.
When you want to write that last chapter and wrap it around,
Yeah.
I'll work with you as co-author. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's stay over here on the right.
I'm an environmental science major here, and I work at a kids' science museum back in Winston-Salem, which is about an hour and a half south of here.
Yeah.
And this prevailing issue we have on staff at the museum is we want to try and approach people with these ideas of change, whether it be climate or society or culture or anything like that. And people are so resistant. I mean, they dig heels in, they start pushing on the wall, screaming and yelling, like nobody wants to seemingly to listen to this kind of stuff. So you've written a book about this, you're here for your book about this. When it comes to people who, won't pull the hoodie off, how do you approach people like that?
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. This is part of one of the tragedies of our age, is that people say, do you believe in climate change? Are you a denier? It's sort of like we've somehow painted a moral stance onto a scientific dilemma. If you put somebody in a corner and force them to choose between believing whatever you're talking about and their spiritual, moral, family-based experience, there's no contest, right? And what's interesting about this is that people feel like they have to choose. And I just try to keep reinforcing the fact that you don't have to choose. That this is data, these are things that can coexist with those other aspects of your life. I try to bring it back to human experience. I mean, you have agendas on both sides. I mean, I think one thing that would help quite a bit is if there's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy within the environmental movement. If your personal feelings, or you're dug in, or you don't believe this, or you're hostile toward this, but you never get any days off, so you never take a vacation, and you have 2 cars, but one of them's busted, so you can't drive it. Your carbon footprint is probably pretty small compared to the person who's preaching at you, or whatever it is, right? So there has to be, and I think a lot of environmental messaging has been very, very poor at approaching that hypocrisy. I think there also has to be room for people to approach this in different ways, right? Not everyone is going to be able to, we're all looking for, there's some good way to live so that we're good and we're not harming the earth and da-da-da. And the solution's not gonna be like that. It's gonna be one much more like for agriculture, where a variety of different things come into play, and there are benefits, but there are also, drawbacks that come from that. I could go on and on about this, but the main thing I like to say is that there's definitely hope. We were looking down this barrel of apocalypse in the 1970s with this food problem, and we engineered past it. And that was a big, big deal. It changed everything, right? The agricultural revolution. And we can have another energy revolution. If we can do it once, we can do it twice. And we need to have the courage to believe that, even if we don't know the details quite yet.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's come over here to the left.
Thank you. My name's Hannah. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. When I was deciding my major, I read your memoir, Lab Girl, and it really excited me about the field and becoming a field ecologist. So thank you for that as well. But I just wanted to kind of ask you that as you get kind of further into the major, into the scientific field, especially as college students sitting in classrooms, hearing a lot of these hard statistics, and sometimes it can be very doom and gloom and feel very, very scary, obviously for a good reason. But I know you just touched on, the hope you have. I was wondering if there's a very specific, or maybe not so specific, thing that's coming out right now, or study, or maybe innovation that you've seen that's keeping you hopeful about the future of our planet and our climate in a time where it can be really easy to kind of sink into that climate anxiety that I know a lot of us have.
Absolutely. So, and this is something I didn't see coming, and this is something I'm so excited about. I'm working on a book right now. So Storyboard has some zingers in it, like the modern workplace requires commuting in cars, and infectious disease has largely been defeated in the first world, right? And so COVID happened, so the book came out March 4th, and there are massive shutdowns like March 20th, right? And COVID was a terrible thing, there's nothing good about it, but it taught us some things. And it taught us that a lot of the things we had convinced ourselves were necessary were actually optional, right? We don't have to physically, I remember I gave a talk, I try to give this talk sometimes on Zoom so that I'm not flying there, right? And I gave this talk to the University of Minnesota in January, and it was on Skype or whatever we had back then. And I remember one of the questions was for the audience is like, okay, yeah, well, we came to listen to you today, but do you really think this will catch on? And within 4 months, everything was on Zoom, right? Just the flexibility of some of our social practices turned out to be amazing. What's coming out of that I think is interesting is that people are starting to rigorously question the value and context of their labor. What is worth leaving my house for? What is worth, how much is my labor worth in terms of, what I get paid and the conditions of my labor and the context of it? I mean, America's grappling with that like never before, I think. I mean, and this is going to continue. You see this in businesses that are ordering people back to work. The same businesses that, 3 years ago were crowing about how they were more efficient than ever with their employees at home are now demanding people to come in. And I just think that it was such a cultural shakeup, and there's room inside the fact that we gave up so much that we've got this very recent demonstration that we can live without a lot of the things we just did, right? I see a lot of, that's kind of a squishy answer, but that's what I'm most excited about right now.
Thank you.
Let's stay over here, and then we can finish with those last two over there.
Hi, my name is Claire. Thank you so much for coming. I was just wondering if you had any ideas as us as students, or just like the Boone area, that can help with these problems.
Yeah, I've seen really successful things happen. One of the most successful, I think this was Davis, they took out, and honest to gosh, they made stickers that said, this comes from trees. And they put this sticker on napkin dispensaries and on toilet paper rolls and on hand towels in the bathroom. And then they were able to watch the data and see how much consumption went down. And it was the most amazing thing, just by this messaging. They were able to, and it was voluntary. People were really looking at this like, there's the trade-off, and do I really need to take 4,000 napkins or whatever it is? And I thought that was a really wonderful exercise, and that it's something that students can see in one semester and get behind and stuff like that. So I would just say, don't underestimate the value of the little things you do, not because of those themselves, but because they put you into a mindset of questioning, do I need this? Do I want to carry it around? Do I have to get that? Et cetera. Another really successful thing that's happening now is food waste. So cafeterias are often do you have that here? We threw away this much food this month or whatever. And that, just having that sign there has vastly reduced the amount of food waste. And it also is a clear sign that your community cares. You know, it's you know, all you just don't underestimate how much these positive things, because it's all about sustaining us until the next revolution, right? We do need to have some breakthroughs, but we need to sustain ourselves and our hopes and our relationships with each other until those days come.
Thank you so much.
Do you have time for two more? Let's go over here for these last two.
Hi, my name is Meredith. Thanks for coming today. I'm a senior who's about to graduate, and I'm looking to go into the world of sustainable business. So that's kind of where my question comes from. I was just curious on your opinion on the concept of carbon credits, specifically for larger corporations, and what you see that in the future, if that's an effective or a measurable way to keep big corporations accountable for their emissions, or if you had an opinion on that.
I'm not a big fan of the carbon credit model because it sort of tries to put this, it sort of tries to create a financial reward for not doing something, sort of like a negative commodity. And the way we've seen it work in other scenarios is that it's a little too easy to get around the thing. So to get around, with the world as global as it is, and with commerce as global as it is, if you can relocate one of your carbon producing factories outside your borders, then you can get the carbon credit, but still get the, you know, finance. So there's a lot of that kind of business. I think one is basically trying to force something that's doesn't lend itself to a market interaction into a market by assigning value to it. And it's sort of, I just don't see how you could make it work economically. I think you could reduce emissions that way. There might be some hope in, you know, a minor adjustment that way, but I don't think you could change major practices that way. I'm not an economist or a global economist, though.
Yeah, no,
probably
I
have
agree
people
with
here.
you.
We probably have people here that have other opinions, but
Yeah, no, I was just interested to hear your take. Thank you.
yeah. And how do you enforce that, right? You know?
Go ahead, one more.
Okay. Hi, my name is Becca, and I found myself a little bit confused, and so I guess I just wanted to voice the contradictions that are in my head and kind of see what your thoughts are. But how I view the Green Revolution is an extension of the Industrial Revolution, which began in 1850 and is largely what when we look at these carbon graphs, you just see around that. Oh,
I can't hear you super well.
Oh,
so you started out by saying probably probably less microphone is better.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Do you want me to shout?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So my name's Becca, and I found myself confused.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to kind of just voice that and see what your thoughts are. And that my understanding of the Green Revolution is that it's an extension of the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution like being a really pivotal like moment in time when things change, and we see this like exponential growth in, you know, carbon in the atmosphere, but also like mass consumption as a whole. And so like so I've graduated, but in my undergrad did a lot of research actually with Dr. Tuberty, but regarding like hog farms and how we see that like starting in the 80s and 90s, like if we view hog farming in eastern North Carolina as a product of the Industrial Revolution, the like vast amounts of like violence that was like imposed upon the people who were supposedly like gifted this like green revolution. And so I guess like first I like struggle with the idea that like the green revolution being a revolution, and that like in ways it is, but in ways I also see it as like an extension of the Industrial Revolution, that like they didn't get that creative. They just took like the machinery that was at Ford and like applied these same logics to farming. And so I guess like something that's really important for me and like my climate advocacy is like not shaming people. I think that's a huge reason why like no one's in the environmental movement, because joining the environmental movement means that you have to feel like shit every time you use a plastic straw. And so I guess like my question for you and like how I see solutions like moving forward is like, how do we get really creative in a way that isn't like something we call a revolution that's just an extension of the problem, like if we're viewing the Industrial Revolution as like the source. And so I guess like to get to my point, and my question is like thinking to like hope to avoid shame and like be really, really creative, like what do you see as solutions going forward?
Right. So, yeah, okay. So the Industrial Revolution, we think of the innovation of the steam engine and the combustion engine, which allowed us to move around, which allowed us to do mechanical work inside of factories. The Green Revolution I think of more as associated with molecular biology, so a breeding revolution, also with biochemistry, so fertilizers and irrigation methods and things like that. So separate jump forward in technologies. You're right exactly that many of the innovations of the Industrial Revolution were used to, say, till the soil, et cetera, before putting in the GMO seeds, before applying the fertilizer, et cetera, right? So I see those two things as separate. I think I use revolution in the terms of revolve. So the system revolves into something new. There's another connotation with the revolution in that it's a sort of a conquering. And so you have a victor and a victim. And that's an important thing to remember, is that when we have these revolutions, there are winners and losers, right? There are, the Industrial Revolution, a lot of the work that was done by machines used to be done by human labor, human beings. So you see opportunities you see machines have freed up opportunities for education, opportunities for all kinds of things, but have also locked other people into resource providing, et cetera, et cetera. So, what was the original question? Am I getting there?
Like how to creatively like look into climate solutions in a way that like is more of a new idea rather than like taking machinery, like like creative climate solutions that like aren't around shame.
Aren't?
That shame isn't an instrumental part in, because I feel like, that's just like so much of what I see is like, want to feel shame? Be an environmentalist.
Yeah, right. Well, you see, I mean, this is also one of the sad things about the environment. These people are acting out a lot of other issues, and they're having a lot of other discussions under the guise of talking about the planet and talking about other things. the way to combat shame is for people not to shame each other. I don't know if I have a if I have a fantastic new approach for that. I think we need to accept that everybody, you know, if I sent everybody home today and said, hey, cut your energy use for one day, just throw me a bone, I came all this way and I talked to you, just tomorrow, just use less energy. Everybody in this room would do a different thing to cut their energy. You know, some folks would take the bus and other folks would take some metal silverware with them and eat with those and bring them back home, and you know, stuff I can't even, you know, come up with. But we have to give each other the room to approach these things with some diversity, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe we have time for one quick one.
One more.
Oh, okay. Dr. Jahren, thank you so much for coming and talking with us. You talk about this new revolution in energy. So I was wondering, and I know we need a mix of renewable energy to get where we want to be, but do you have any renewable energy type that you prefer? And the second part would be, what lessons can we learn from the Netherlands with respect to wind power?
Do I have any
preferred renewable energy? Like, would you prefer solar over wind, over nuclear, over hydrogen, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more of a fan of engineering the types of energy that we use now, believe it or not. I'm not entirely sold on electric cars, for example, because I know that we have a lot of potential to make cars, fossil fuel using cars, more efficient. I think there's a lot of potential there for ride sharing. So anytime the lever is huge, right? If a bus, as opposed to 20 people driving their own cars, I mean, the factors associated with buses and trains and public transportation. If you want to make a big difference in your community, advocate for public transportation, number one, and food waste. Those are the two biggest levers I can get you to tackle. I think one thing we have to be careful of is mandating our aspirations and assuming the technology will fall into line. This is something I argue with people about all the time in Norway, in that after 2025, you won't be able to buy a gas-powered car in Norway. That's all well and good, but we do not have the infrastructure to do the charging that we need to do by that time, right? So we're going to have queues of, 45 minutes to recharge your vehicle. On Christmas, everybody's trying to get up into the mountains. It's going to be, we just aren't going to be able to put together the infrastructure by 2025. So I think it's a little bit like buying a size 4 dress for next Christmas and saying, yeah, I did something because, I've got my dress all ready to go. But realistically, we have to go for these things. I think in the short term, re-engineering the technologies we've got. Nuclear is pretty safe. I mean, the number of nuclear generators we have versus the number of accidents that have occurred is very large. It's just that when things go wrong, they go very, very wrong. If we can focus on making that more foolproof, that'll probably get us a long way. I think it would be a good idea to return to some of the things that are already in place, because anything new that we want to do is not only going to require that technology, it's going to require an entire supportive infrastructure around it, and we have to be ready for that too. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It does. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Jahren. And thank you all for being here. In just a few minutes, after she's had a chance to catch her breath, Dr. Jahren will be available in the lobby to sign books. And that, recall, can be books that you've brought with you or books that you buy from the App State campus store in the lobby. Thank you again. Please.
Or you can get it at the library. That's where I keep all my books. Don't feel like you have to buy a book just to come and say hello, please.